Right, so picture this. You're the Prime Minister, you've spent months defending a policy. Farmers are literally protesting in the streets. There are tractors blocking Westminster, you've got backbenchers sweating, and then one random Tuesday afternoon, GB News cuts to breaking news and essentially announces you've bottled it. Again. That's not a political strategy, that's a masterclass in chaos. And honestly, if I had £1 for every time Keir Starmer's government has face-planted this year, I'd probably have enough to pay the inheritance tax they just U-turned on. Welcome back to UK Political Insight, where we dissect the absolute circus that is British politics, one humiliation at a time. And trust me, this one's a belter. The Labour government has just performed what can only be described as a fiscal backflip on their inheritance tax policy for farmers. The threshold has jumped from £1 million quid to £2.5 million. That's not a minor tweak, that's Rachel Reeves Budget getting absolutely shredded, and she's nowhere to be seen. It's like watching someone set fire to their own manifesto and then pretending they meant to do it all along. So let's talk about how we got here, because this isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. This is about trust, or more accurately, the complete absence of it. Before the election, Steve Reed, the Environment Secretary, stood up and promised Labour wouldn't touch family farm tax. Cross my hearth, hope to die, stick a tractor in my eye. Except the moment they got the keys to number 10, what did they do? Slapped a family farm tax right on the table like it was the most natural thing in the world. Victoria Atkins, the Conservative MP, wasn't mincing words about this. She pointed out the sheer audacity of promising one thing and delivering the exact opposite. And you know what? She's got a point. When your first major move contradicts your pre-election promises, you're not exactly building a foundation of credibility. But here's where it gets darker, and I mean genuinely troubling. We're not just talking about bad policy or political point scoring anymore. Farmers have been writing to ministers for over a year, expressing serious concerns. Some of these letters weren't just complaints about money, they were cries for help. There was a farmer who took his own life before Christmas last year. That's not a statistic, that's a human being who felt so crushed by the pressure that they saw no way out. And according to Atkins, ministers knew. They knew about the suicides, they knew about the warnings, they knew farmers were desperate, and for 14 months the response was essentially radio silence, punctuated by dodgy maths claiming 75% of estates wouldn't be affected. Here's the thing about that 75% figure. Every farmer Atkins spoke to said they'd be hit, every single one. So either the government's calculator is broken, or they were being economical with the truth, which is political speak for lying. When your statistics don't match reality on the ground, you've got a problem. When farmers who actually work the land are telling you you're wrong, and you just keep repeating the same numbers like a broken record, that's not governance, that's stubbornness dressed up in policy. And the protesters weren't subtle about their discontent either. Remember those tractors rolling into Westminster? That wasn't a few disgruntled individuals, that was an entire industry saying enough is enough. British farmers aren't exactly known for revolutionary fervour. These are people who get up at 4 in the morning to feed livestock and work land that's been in their families for generations. When they're angry enough to drive their machinery into central London and disrupt traffic, you should probably pay attention. But Labour kept pushing forward, insisting the policy was sound, insisting the math added up, insisting farmers were overreacting, right up until they U-turned so hard they probably got whiplash. Now let's address the elephant in the room, or more accurately, the Chancellor who's conspicuously absent from it. Where exactly is Rachel Reeves during all this? This was her budget. She stood at that dispatch box and delivered these proposals. She defended them. And now someone else is announcing they're being watered down. That's not how fiscal responsibility works. You can't just have random ministers wandering around unpicking the budget whenever it becomes politically inconvenient. Christopher Hope nailed it when he asked where she was. This is her budget being torn apart, and she's vanished like a ghost at sunrise. Atkins raised a brilliant point about the precedent this sets. If Steve Reed or whoever else can just announce major fiscal changes outside of an official fiscal event, what's stopping other ministers from doing the same? Does this mean we're going to get surprise tax announcements on a random Wednesday because some policy became too politically painful? The whole point of having formal budget processes is to maintain economic stability and give businesses and individuals time to plan. You can't run an economy like you're improvising a pub quiz, although given Labour's recent track record, that might be giving them too much credit. The accusations of shameful behaviour aren't coming from nowhere either. Atkins used that word deliberately, shameful. That's a strong term in political discourse. You don't throw that around lightly unless you genuinely believe the government has acted beneath acceptable standards. And when you consider the timeline, the ignored letters, the dismissed warnings, the farmers who reached breaking point, the months of protests that were essentially brushed aside until the political cost became too high, shameful starts to feel pretty accurate. This wasn't a government listening to concerns and thoughtfully adjusting policy. This was a government being dragged kicking and screaming to a U-turn because the alternative was worse. What's particularly galling is the Conservatives are now positioned as the defenders of farmers, which is somewhat ironic given they were in power for 14 years before this. But credit where it's due, they're seizing the opportunity. Atkins talked about working with the farming community to build a bright and positive vision for agriculture. That's smart politics. Labour has created a vacuum of trust, and the Tories are rushing in to fill it. Whether they'll actually follow through if they get back into power is another question entirely. But right now they don't need to prove anything. They just need to not be Labour, and apparently that's enough. The broader issue here is what this says about Labour's governing style. We're barely a year into their term, and we've already got multiple U-turns, broken promises, and policies being shredded outside official channels. Remember the confidence everyone had that Starmer would bring stability and competence after the chaos of Johnson and Truss years. That feels like a very long time ago. Instead, we've got a government that seems to lurch from crisis to crisis, making bold announcements and then quietly backtracking when the heat gets too intense. That's not strong governance, that's reactive flailing. And let's be clear about what inheritance tax on farms actually means in practice. This isn't about wealthy landowners hiding assets. Most farmers are asset-rich but cash-poor. They've got land worth millions, but they're not exactly swimming in liquid capital. When you force them to pay substantial inheritance tax, they often have to sell parts of the farm to cover it. That breaks up agricultural land, disrupts food production, and destroys family legacies that stretch back generations. It's a policy that sounds progressive on paper, but in reality just hammers exactly the wrong people while doing very little in terms of actual revenue. The maths argument is particularly telling. The government insisted their figures proved most farms wouldn't be affected. Farmers insisted the opposite. And who turned out to be right? The people who actually work in agriculture every single day. Shocking. There's a lesson there about the importance of consulting with the people your policies actually impact, rather than just running some numbers through treasury models and assuming you know better. But that would require humility and a willingness to listen, which seem to be in short supply at the moment. What makes this whole saga even more frustrating is it was entirely predictable. When you propose a controversial tax change affecting a tight-knit community with strong traditions and significant political clout, you're going to face resistance. That's no news. The smart move would have been proper consultation before the policy was announced. Talk to farmers, understand their concerns, design something that achieves your revenue goals without destroying livelihoods. But instead, Labour charged ahead, convinced they knew best, and now they're paying the price in political capital and credibility. The timing of the announcement is suspicious as well. Why now? What changed? The protests have been happening for months. The concerns have been known for over a year. So why suddenly cave? The cynical answer is probably the simplest one. The political cost finally outweighed the benefits. Labour MPs in rural constituencies were getting nervous. The media coverage was brutal. The optics of ignoring farmers while some were literally at breaking point was becoming untenable. So they folded, not because they believed they were wrong, but because continuing was more damaging than admitting defeat. And that brings us back to trust, or the lack thereof. When you promise one thing before an election and do the opposite after, people notice. When you ignore warnings for over a year and only change course when forced, people notice. When your Chancellor's budget gets rewritten by other ministers outside proper fiscal processes, people notice. Labour's challenge now isn't just this specific policy, it's convincing anyone they can be trusted on anything. Every future announcement will be viewed through this lens. Every promise will be questioned. Every assurance will be doubted. That's the real cost of this mess. Victoria Atkins finished by calling the government's behaviour shameful, and honestly it's hard to agree. Setting aside partisan politics for a moment, the basic standard should be that governments listen to their citizens, take warnings seriously, and respond thoughtfully to legitimate concerns. By that metric, Labour failed spectacularly. They had a year to get this right. They had farmers literally begging for help. They had tragic cases that should have been wake-up calls. And they ploughed ahead anyway until the political reality forced a humiliating climb down. So where does this leave us? Well, Starmer's got another embarrassing U-turn on his record. Reeves has had her budget undermined, and she's nowhere to be seen to defend it. Labour's credibility on fiscal policy is in tatters. The Conservatives smell blood and are positioning themselves as the party that actually cares about rural Britain.